Good afternoon, Detective Carpenter. If you would please make your way to the witness stand, which is to my right. It is up one riser. When you get there, please remain standing. Raise your right hand, and my clerk, Teresa, will swear you in.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please have a seat. The first thing I will ask you to do is to state your first and last names for the record and spell each.
Sure. My name is Detective Jay Carpenter. First name spelled Jay, last name spelled Carpenter.
Go ahead.
Sir, how are you employed?
I am employed as a detective with the City of Waukesha Police Department.
How long have you been in law enforcement?
18 years?
Have all those years been with the City of Waukesha Police Department?
Yes.
How long have you been detective?
Almost 5 years.
Direct your attention to November 21st of last year. Were you working on that day?
Yes, I was.
Were you working the parade?
I had actually been part of the parade. I marched in the parade as part of our Honor Guard unit and had completed my duty before the incident commenced.
So this is the City of Waukesha annual holiday parade?
Correct.
Okay. And you say that after you finished the parade route, where did you go?
So I went back to the City of Waukesha Police Department after I completed my part of the parade.
And did you receive information while you were at the City of Waukesha Police Department regarding something that had happened at the parade?
Objection leading.
Overruled. You may answer, sir.
I did. I changed out of my Honor Guard uniform, and I was confronted by Officer Daniel Malo. He was working as a desk officer for the department that day. Officer Malo explained that a vehicle had driven through the parade route down in downtown Waukesha, that there were approximately 30 to 40 people down, many severely injured, some possibly deceased, and that there was also an officer-involved shooting involved in the whole event.
What did you do as a result of receiving that information?
At that point, I went on duty and began heading towards the downtown area.
Where did you go specifically?
So when I headed out, there was a lot of radio traffic. It was very chaotic, very confusing. It was certainly like nothing I've ever experienced before, as far as the radio traffic. The event kind of began to mold into two different forms at that point, in that there were numerous officers calling for ambulances in the downtown area for the injured, but dispatch was also beginning to provide information that there was an individual in the area of the 500 block of Elizabeth Street, which is about a quarter of a mile off the parade route, that was loitering, and it was believed that may be the suspect, so I headed in that direction.
Now, prior to heading in that direction, did you have any information as to why this person in that area would be a suspect?
Objection leading.
Overruled. He may answer.
Yes, ma'am. A description had been provided of a possible suspect, and the descriptions being provided by the dispatch of the individual now in this area were comparable, nearly identical to the descriptions I was hearing of the driver from the parade incident.
What did you do then?
As I was searching the area, I heard over the police radio that officers from a separate jurisdiction had come in contact with the suspect and that he was in custody. I proceeded over to Elizabeth Street, where the suspect, who was identified in the investigation as Darrell Brooks, was already in custody.
Okay. Now, you stated that the information that you initially received with regard to the person involved's physical description, do you recall what that was?
Objection leading.
Overruled. He may answer.
Information that I heard over police radio was an African-American male, blue jeans, and a red T-shirt.
So what did you do after receiving this information about a potential person in custody?
I responded to the immediate area. Mr. Brooks at that point was already in custody. I don't recall if he was outside a squad being searched, but he was handcuffed and already effectively in custody at that point. He was placed in the rear of a City Waukesha police car, where he was taken into custody for loitering as well as being a suspect at that point as the operator of the vehicle that went through the parade route.
Objection, I don't consent to being called that name, for the record.
Overruled. Your answer stands. Go ahead. Next question.
At the time that you made contact with this individual, did you have any information about the vehicle that had been used during the parade?
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
Yes, a red SUV. That was actually a red Ford Escape, specifically.
And did you have any information if that car had been located at the time that you went to the Elizabeth Street address?
Yes, it had already been located.
Did you have any information about that red SUV prior to going to Elizabeth Street?
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
The information I recall having is that the vehicle was parked over on Maple Avenue, which is about 2.5 to 3 blocks west of Elizabeth Street, where Mr. Brooks was located and taken into custody.
Objection, I don't consent to being called that name.
Overruled.
Did you have the opportunity to speak with an individual who was identified as Darrell Brooks
Objection,
at that Elizabeth
I
Street
don't
address?
consent to being called that name.
Go ahead. You may answer.
I don't believe I spoke with him at that address, but Mr. Brooks was transported to our substation located on Les Paul Parkway in the city of Waukesha, where I had opportunity to speak with him.
Did you see him at the Elizabeth Street address?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you see him in the court today?
I do.
I'd ask the court to ask Mr. Brooks to remove his mask.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks.
Can you identify him by where he's seated and what he's wearing?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Brooks is seated to my left, wearing a dark-colored suit jacket, multicolored tie, surgical mask on his face, shaved head, and he did have a beard at the time he took his mask off.
Let the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant.
It will reflect. Thank you.
Sir, as you see Mr. Brooks today, does he look different than he did on November 21st of last year?
Objection, relevancy.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, ma'am.
How?
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
At the time of the incident, Mr. Brooks had longer hair, a braided style hair that probably went midway down his back.
How about facial-wise?
He had a beard at that time, but it's a little bit shorter now. It was a little bit thicker and longer at the time.
So you stated that the defendant was transported to a substation?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay. And do you recall who transported him?
Specialist Mark Howard.
Did you follow Specialist Howard to the substation?
Yes, I did.
Upon either, should I say, at the scene, did you obtain items that were located on the defendant's person?
Yes, I did.
What did they consist of?
So the items I received that were on Mr. Brooks' person at the time of his arrest, there were several items. One of them was a Wisconsin photo identification card. So it had a picture on the ID card that I recognized as being Mr. Brooks based on the fact I was with him at this time. The name on that identification card was Darrell Edward Brooks Jr., his date of birth being February 21st, 1982. There was also a green Wisconsin Quest card with Mr. Brooks' name on it, a silver American Express debit or credit card with Mr. Brooks' name on it, 2 Visa debit cards, one black, one white, both which had Mr. Brooks' name on it. And then there was a Georgia EBT card which had the name of Mr. Brooks' girlfriend on it.
Other than the identifying information that you just testified to, is anything else turned over to you that was removed from Darrell Brooks?
Objection, I don't consent to being called that name and it's leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, ma'am. There was $4 cash, but also a Ford ignition key.
Now, you stated that there was a suspect vehicle that had been located.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have any information prior to your discussions with the defendant about who the owner of that vehicle was?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, I did.
And who was the owner of that vehicle?
A female by the name of Dawn Woods.
And do you recall what her address was?
Objection. Relevancy.
Overruled. The witness may answer.
4014 North 19th Street in the city of Milwaukee.
So 19th Street, you said?
Yes, ma'am.
Objection. Leading witness.
Overruled. The answer may stand.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 172. That's going to appear on the screen in front of you. Before we do that, these identifiers that you located for Darrell Brooks, did you take a picture of them?
Yes, ma'am.
Objection. I don't consent to being called that name for the 100th time.
Overruled.
And let me know when you see something in your
I see it.
Okay. Do you recognize these items as those items you just described as having been removed from the defendant's person?
Yes, I do.
I'd ask the court to admit this exhibit into evidence and to publish it for the jury.
Objection. Relevancy.
Objection is overruled. Exhibit 172 is received. Permission to publish is granted.
If you can specifically zoom in on the Wisconsin ID card. The address on that Wisconsin identification card, is that the same address that you recited for Dawn Woods?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And what was the date that that card was issued?
Objection. Relevancy.
Overruled. The witness may answer.
June 14th, 2021.
And the picture on the identification card, would that be consistent or inconsistent with what the defendant looked like on November 21st of last year?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
It's almost exactly what he looks like.
Now, as you were at the substation, what did you do that can be removed? I'm sorry.
Thank you.
For the most part, what we were doing down there is obtaining basic booking information. So I confirmed Mr. Brooks' first name, middle name, last name, date of birth. I obtained an emergency contact for him, phone numbers, whether he was working or not, going to school. Obtained information about his tattoos, piercings, things of that nature. Personal identification information.
Okay. And who did he say his emergency contact was?
Objection. Relevancy.
Overruled. You may answer.
Mr. Brooks indicated his emergency contact person was Dawn Woods.
And what relationship was Dawn Woods to him?
Objection. Relevancy.
Overruled. You may answer.
It is Mr. Brooks' mother.
And did you subsequently obtain a phone number for Dawn Woods?
I did.
Objection. Relevancy.
Overruled. The witness may answer.
What is that phone number, if you recall?
Objection. Relevancy.
414-610-2153.
Now, when you asked the defendant for his name, what did he tell you his name was?
Objection. Relevancy.
Overruled.
I believe he indicated it was Darrell, D-A-R-R-E-L-L, which, in speaking with him, and I can confirm, seeing him today, Darrell Brooks or Darrell Brooks are one and the same. They are the same person.
Did you become aware of any video evidence that was collected in the downtown area during the parade, capturing a picture of the person who drove the red SUV through the parade?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. The witness may answer.
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And you said you saw that?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to ask that Exhibit 120, which has been previously admitted into evidence, be published for the jury.
Go ahead.
Is that the photographic evidence that you just testified to?
Objection.
Overruled.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And do you recall approximately, was this the car being driven while the parade, in the midst of the parade, after the parade, or before the parade, if you know?
Objection. Hearsay.
Overruled.
So the photo we're looking at right here is right in the middle of the parade. So right now, the vehicle is within the parade route while the parade is ongoing.
And were you able to positively identify the driver of that vehicle?
Yes, ma'am,
Objection.
I was.
Hearsay.
Overruled.
Who is the driver of that vehicle?
The driver of the vehicle is Darrell Brooks.
Thank you. Approximately how long?
You done with this exhibit? I'm sorry.
I am, yes.
Thank you.
How long were you at the substation?
Probably about 2 to 2.5 hours.
Why were you there versus anywhere else?
So at this particular time, the department was in a transition. Our original building was under construction. The building we were primarily working out of did not have a booking room, did not have a place to take prisoners, so we had to go down to the substation instead of our own actual police department.
Other than collecting the information that you had previously told us about, including emergency contact information, name, things like that, what else were you doing at the substation?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. The witness may answer.
Mainly at that time, just waiting for further information as to what was going to be done next. Like I say, the scene was very, very chaotic. I know there were so many victims out there, they didn't even have enough ambulances to transport them all. So officers, it took, I feel like probably hours to really get it under control. So I was just waiting on more information from Detective Casey, who had been assigned as lead to determine what steps would be appropriate next. It's just being there with Mr. Brooks and making sure he was safe and remained in custody. I didn't have a real good idea due to the chaos of what was going on away from where I was.
Now, you had testified about some of the property that was recovered from the defendant, and you stated that one of the items was a card in the name of Erica Patterson. Do you recall that?
Objection. He did not say who was in the name of.
Sustained. Please rephrase.
Actually, if we can pull up Exhibit 172 again.
Objection. Hearsay.
There's no question yet, but
And if you can zoom in on the Georgia EBT card. Whose name is on that card?
Erica
Objection.
Patterson.
Leading.
overruled. Go ahead. You can answer that again.
Erica Patterson.
Did you, at the time that you were at the substation, have any information regarding an Erica Patterson and her relationship to Darrell Brooks?
Objection. That I don't consent to being called that name.
Overruled. You may answer, sir.
Objection is hearsay.
Overruled.
Not at that time, no.
Did you later learn of a relationship between the defendant and Erica Patterson?
Objection. Hearsay.
Overruled.
Yes, I did.
And what was that relationship?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled.
Ms. Patterson was a significant other or girlfriend to Mr. Brooks and mother of one of his children.
Objection. Not girlfriend.
Overruled. The jury will disregard that last statement as Mr. Brooks is not testifying at the moment.
Well, keep it true.
Now, when you made contact with Darrell Brooks or while you're making contact with Darrell Brooks at the substation, did he complain of any injuries?
Objection. I don't consent to being called that name. I
Overruled.
think
You
the
may answer.
prosecution is trying to be funny at this point.
Yes, ma'am, he did.
Hold on. I didn't hear the last thing, but I believe it was commentary. So just state your objection and I'll rule on it. It's been overruled. You may answer.
Yes, ma'am, he did. He complained of two injuries, one to his knee, but primarily and mostly of an injury to what was his right shoulder.
Did he say how that occurred?
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled.
Yes, he did. Mr. Brooks told us that his shoulder was injured when he was arrested, indicating the arresting officers slammed him to the ground.
Did you have the opportunity at any point in this investigation to review body camera footage from Officer Rebecca Carpenter?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was at the residence where the defendant was taken into custody?
Yes, ma'am, it was.
Did you see any unlawful use of force on the defendant during that time?
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled. The witness may answer.
No, ma'am. In fact, there was no force used at all. Mr. Brooks was given verbal directions by officers to get down onto the ground, and he did so entirely on his own power.
Based upon his complaints, however, was the decision made to transport him for medical clearance?
Yes, ma'am.
And where did you transport the defendant?
Waukesha Memorial Hospital.
Do you know approximately what time you arrived there?
I don't remember the exact time. It was sometime, I believe it was between about 8 and 9 p.m.
Upon entering, who was with you and Mr. Brooks?
Objection, I don't consent to being called a name misleading the witness.
Overruled as to both. You may answer.
Detective Ben Stern.
Okay. Was he partnering with you in this part of the investigation?
Yes, ma'am, he was.
Okay. And when you entered the hospital, what observations, if any, did you make?
Entering the hospital, we escorted Mr. Brooks, to a room so that he could receive medical clearance. I know there were some individuals from the parade that were injured in nearby rooms. I didn't really see many of them, but I knew they were close by. So we escorted Mr. Brooks into a room, trying to keep away from the victims so as to not make the incident any more tension-filled than it already was.
How busy was it at the hospital when you brought Mr. Brooks in?
Objection, leading.
Overruled. The witness may answer.
Extremely. There were victims due to the mass amount of casualties, many of which survived but still needed extensive medical attention. It was very busy. Many of the victims were taken to alternate hospitals because Waukesha Memorial could not handle the amount of patients that were coming in.
Now, approximately how long did you spend with Mr. Brooks at Waukesha Memorial Hospital?
Objection, I don't consent to being called a name.
Overruled.
Probably about 4 hours.
Is that in addition to the time that you would have spent with him at the substation?
Yes, ma'am.
Leading.
Overruled.
What was his demeanor?
Extremely calm. If I would describe it, I guess, to put it in context for the court, very similar to mine right now. The conversations I had with him, as far as getting his identification info and such, he talked to me as calmly as I'm speaking now. Based on his body language, his tone of voice, his attitude, you'd have never known he had done something or was in custody for having done something so serious.
Did he ask you why he was in custody at the substation?
Yes.
And what did you tell him?
At that point, I simply told Mr. Brooks it was a loitering investigation and possible disorderly conduct.
Now, you just testified that he was a suspect in the parade mass casualty incident. Why didn't you tell him that?
At that time, I didn't want to make Mr. Brooks, one, overly anxious. Two, there was a lot of information initially I still didn't know. It was initially, as part of the chaos, I believe at one point we were actually looking for as many as four people. So I didn't know how deeply he was or was not involved. It was believed that and known that he was somehow involved and knew something. So before I even addressed those issues, one, I wanted to make sure I knew all the facts and had as much information as I could, more than anything for the integrity of the case.
when you talk about the integrity of the case and your discussions with him, did the defendant appear to know what was going on around him? When I say that, I guess, was he aware of where he was, who you were, things like that?
Objection, speculative.
As to the way it was rephrased in the second half of that, I will allow it. You may answer.
Yes, he did. He seemed, he was alert. When asked questions, like, for example, his about phone number, his emergency contact, the answers were consistent with the question asked. He did not have slurred speech. He did not show any signs of being under the influence or in mental crisis.
Did your opinion change at any time while you were with him on November 21st?
Objection, vague.
Overruled. You may answer.
No, it did not.
Now, during the 4 hours that you were at the hospital, were you, do you continue to complain about shoulder pain?
Yes, he did.
Were his actions always consistent with his expression of the pain in the shoulder?
Objection, speculative.
Overruled. You may answer.
No, they were not.
Can you describe for the jury what you mean by that?
Objection, speculative. How can he know how somebody's body is feeling?
Overruled. He may answer, given as long as he answers with his understanding. Or what
Observations is what I was saying.
Observation.
Yes.
Thank you. I think that's what you said. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So Mr. Brooks, when he would speak to me throughout the evening, he would move his arms about, he'd put them out to his side, he'd move them back and forth, he'd raise them up and down. He was talking about being in severe pain, but I would describe the way he'd move his arms and such as basic body mannerisms and basic interpersonal interactions. His hands, his arms, everything moved completely normally when we would speak. There was no favoring of that shoulder or anything to indicate other than what he was saying through physical action that there was any type of injury there that I observed.
Now, at some point, I strike that. During this time that you were with him and he was getting medically cleared, first of all, did he get medically cleared?
Yes, he did.
Objection, speculative.
He didn't need to be...
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Overruled. His answer may stand.
Did he need any treatment while at the hospital?
No, he was checked out. The doctor came in and looked at his shoulder. I do not believe any medications were given. There may have been, I believe they took an x-ray to check it, but he was ultimately cleared and turned over to police custody.
And during the time that you were with him while he was getting medically cleared, what type of conversation were you having? Was it general conversation, or were you talking to him about the loitering?
Objection, relevancy.
Overruled. You may answer.
The conversation was general. Mr. Brooks asked several times if I would give him more information as to why he was in custody, and I would continue to tell him it was for the loitering violation. But the conversations were mostly, we talked about sports. The Green Bay Packers had played that day. We talked about the game. I remember him telling me that baseball was his favorite sport, and things of that nature. He was upset that the Packers had lost the game. So it was general conversation, not related to why he was specifically in custody.
At some point, did you decide that you were going to try to talk to the defendant about at least the loitering incident?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Relevancy.
Overruled. The witness may answer.
Do you know approximately what time that took place?
11:04 p.m.
And how did you approach this interview? You've now been with Mr. Brooks for maybe 5 hours. Would that be fair?
Yes.
How did you decide to approach this interview with him?
Objection, leading.
Overruled. The witness may answer.
I just explained to Mr. Brooks that I simply wanted to speak with him about why he was in the neighborhood where he was discovered that night, what was going on, what led to him being there, and that I was just looking to have answers to that if he was willing to provide them.
And was Mr. Brooks in a room that had the ability to record the conversation that you had with him?
Objection, I don't consent to being called on the line.
Overruled. You may answer.
No, not in the manner we would if we were at our typical police departments. Our police department would have a camera mounted in the corner that would record audio and video. They did have a security camera, but it had no audio capability.
So what did you do?
I utilized my department-issued phone and recorded the audio of the interview that way.
So you had the audio on your phone and the visual, or there was a visual recording. Is that true?
Yes, so the audio was on my phone, and then the visual recording was through the hospital security system.
Bless you. So they didn't marry up with one another, correct? I mean, in terms of, I should strike that. You couldn't play the audio with the visual. They're two different recordings.
Yes.
Okay. Who else was with you during this interview?
At that time, Detective Ben Stern from my department was with me, as well as two federal agents from the FBI, Agent Mary Davidson and Agent Jeremy, I believe it's Pilichowski.
Why were they there?
So the FBI came involved in the investigation early on because we were not certain at that point whether or not this was a terrorist incident.
So how did it work? Were they in the room and then Mr. Brooks was brought into the room, or how did that work?
Objection, I don't consent to being called that name and is leading the witness.
Overruled as to the name, sustained as to the form of the question.
How did you all get into the same room?
So I was in the room waiting for Mr. Brooks. Mr. Brooks was brought from another room by Detective Stern. At this point, the audio recording on my phone was already running. I believe the two FBI agents were with me in the room, and then, like I say, Mr. Brooks was escorted in by Detective Stern.
Did you introduce yourselves? Well, you had been with Mr. Brooks previously, correct?
Objection.
Yes, I had.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, I had.
Okay. Had he been introduced to Detective Stern already?
Yes, he had.
Okay. And how about the two FBI agents?
It was at that point that they introduced themselves to Mr. Brooks.
What was his reaction to that when they introduced themselves?
Objection, relevancy.
Overruled. You may answer.
Very surprised. He said the word FBI, in the form of a question. I could tell his tone was very surprised. It wasn't as calm as he had been. He seemed concerned, uneasy, and within about a minute after stating that, he questioned the agents further as to whether they were really FBI agents, and he was surprised to see them there, and he had never actually seen an FBI agent before, so he was definitely surprised, and I could tell he was uncomfortable.
Did you record the entire conversation you had with the defendant?
Yes, at that point, all that is on recording. At that point, yes.
And have you had the opportunity to review that recording prior to today's date?
I have.
I would like to admit Exhibit 81 for the
Objection.
court. It is the audio interview of the defendant that took place on November 21st, 2021. It's previously been addressed by this court.
Objection.
Remind me how long that is again.
Your Honor, the entire video is 25 minutes approximately. I'm asking to play from 4 minutes and 25 seconds to 14 minutes and 25 seconds approximately. Well, it would be 10 minutes.
I presume you'll have questions regarding that once you play it.
Correct.
All right. Given that it's just before 5 o'clock, I'm going to stop for the day. We can pick up with this tomorrow. You can put down for the moment, and I will have our instruction for the jurors.